Welcome to Void of Fears, where the line between reality and nightmares blur with every tale. What you're about to hear has happened to someone, somewhere, perhaps even someone just like you. Our community continues to grow, and now we're reaching for 100,000 subscribers. If these glimpses into the unknown call to you, please consider subscribing. Now let's dive into tonight's story. My name is Ryan Clark, and I work for the government's emergency warning system. What I'm about to tell you might save your life, or it might already be too late. I need you to listen carefully to every word I say, because after tonight, you may never hear the truth again. It was Wednesday night, 11:30 p.m, when my world turned upside down. I was sitting in the emergency alert center 3 miles beneath the Nevada desert, doing what I'd done for 3 years, watching screens, drinking coffee, and waiting for disasters that never came. The facility was quiet except for the constant hum of machines and the occasional beep from monitoring equipment. The emergency alert center sits in a reinforced bunker that could survive a direct nuclear strike. Concrete walls 10 feet thick, multiple backup power systems, and communication arrays that could reach every corner of the globe. We had redundant systems for our redundant systems. The government spared no expense when it came to making sure we could warn the American people about incoming threats. My partner, Amy Davis, was in the break room grabbing her third cup of coffee of the night. Amy had been my partner for 18 months, ever since my previous partner, Tom Richards, transferred to a facility in Colorado. She was former military, sharp as a razor, and one of the few people I trusted completely in this business. Our supervisor, Mike Torres, had left early that evening, claiming some family emergency that seemed suspicious at the time. Looking back, I should have known something was wrong when Mike started acting different last week. He'd become too polite, too formal, speaking like he was reading from a script. Mike used to crack jokes during briefings, steal donuts from the break room, and complain about his ex-wife like any normal guy. But recently, he'd become eerily professional, answering questions with textbook responses and never showing any personality. The change had been gradual enough that I dismissed it as work stress. Mike had been passed over for promotion twice in the past year, and I figured he was trying to impress the higher-ups by being more by the book. I wish I'd paid more attention to my instincts. The Emergency Alert Center is exactly what it sounds like. A government facility designed to warn the American people about incoming threats. Nuclear attacks, terrorist incidents, natural disasters, anything that would require immediate public notification. We had direct lines to every major network radio station and cellular provider in the country. When we spoke, the entire nation listened. Our job was simple in theory, but complex in practice. We monitored feeds from NORAD, the National Weather Service, the FBI, CIA, NSA, and dozens of other agencies. When credible threats emerged, we had protocols for different types of warnings: tornado warnings, hurricane evacuations, terrorist alerts, nuclear attack procedures. We drilled on every scenario imaginable. What we hadn't drilled on was what to do when the threat came from inside the system itself. At 11:58 p.m, everything changed. Every single monitor in the facility suddenly displayed the same message in bright red letters: incoming transmission, priority alpha. The text pulsed like a heartbeat, demanding attention. I'd been trained on every classification level, and priority alpha was reserved for extinction level events: nuclear war, asteroid impacts, supervolcano eruptions. In 3 years, I'd never seen anything higher than priority Charlie. The transmission wasn't coming from any government source. According to our tracking systems, it was originating from somewhere beyond our solar system, which should have been impossible. Our equipment wasn't designed to receive signals from deep space. We monitored terrestrial communications, satellite networks, and some near-Earth space assets, but nothing with the range to detect interstellar transmissions. Amy came running from the break room as alarms started blaring throughout the facility. She looked at the screens with the same confusion I felt, her coffee mug still in her hand. "Ryan, what the hell is that? I've never seen a priority alpha alert before." "Neither have I admitted, frantically checking our system diagnostics. Everything appeared to be functioning normally, but the signal source didn't match anything in our databases. Before I could run deeper analysis, every screen flickered and displayed a simple text message. "They're already here. Get inside. Lock your doors. Trust no one." The message wasn't formatted like our standard emergency broadcasts. It was plain text, no official seals or authentication codes, but somehow it had overridden every security protocol we had. The message cycled through 17 different languages: English, Spanish, Mandarin, Russian, Arabic, French, German, Japanese, Hindi, Portuguese, Italian, Korean, Dutch, Swedish, Turkish, Hebrew, and 2 others I couldn't identify. Each version stayed on screen for exactly 10 seconds before moving to the next. "This has to be some kind of test," Amy said, but her voice carried doubt. "Maybe the Pentagon is running an exercise without telling us." I wanted to believe that, but something felt wrong. The message was too urgent, too personal. It didn't read like military communications or government warnings. It sounded like someone desperately trying to save lives. After the final language, everything cut to static. Not the clean, digital static of a lost signal, but the chaotic interference of something actively jamming our communications. The sound filled the room, harsh and disorienting. I grabbed the phone to call Mike, but got no answer. His home phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. His cell phone went straight to voicemail without ringing at all. I tried the Pentagon next, then NORAD, then every other emergency contact on our list. The phone lines were either dead or busy. When I did get through, I heard strange clicking sounds on the line, like someone was listening in on the conversation. Amy tried her cell phone, then the facility's backup communication systems. No signal on any frequency, even though we had signal boosters throughout the facility that should have guaranteed connectivity. It was like something was actively blocking our ability to communicate with the outside world. That's when I noticed the security feeds. Military vehicles were surrounding our building, but I hadn't called for backup. Neither had Amy. Black SUVs and armoured trucks were positioning themselves around every exit. Soldiers in full hazmat suits were climbing out, carrying weapons I didn't recognise. The weapons looked too advanced, too sleek, like they'd come from a science fiction movie. "Amy, we have a problem," I said, pointing to the monitors, showing the exterior. "Look at those vehicles. Do you recognise the markings?" She studied the screens, her military experience showing as she analysed the deployment pattern. "Those aren't standard military vehicles. The armour configuration is wrong, and I've never seen hazmat suits like that. The material looks too smooth, too reflective." The soldiers weren't setting up a defensive perimeter like I would have expected. Instead, they were preparing for an assault on our facility. Breach charges were being placed on reinforced doors. Cutting torches were being positioned near ventilation grates. They were preparing to come inside whether we wanted them to or not. At 12:15 a.m, the facility automatically entered lockdown mode. Steel barriers slammed shut over every entrance and exit, sealing us inside. The sound was deafening, like enormous vault doors closing. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red light. The lockdown protocol was designed to protect us from external threats, but, according to our computer systems, we hadn't triggered it. Someone else was controlling our facility. The lockdown should have been impossible to activate remotely. The system required physical access to control panels inside the facility, plus biometric verification from at least 2 authorized personnel. But somehow someone had bypassed every security measure we had. I ran to the security console and pulled up more camera feeds. The soldiers weren't setting up a perimeter. They were preparing to breach the building. They moved with disturbing precision, like they were following choreographed movements. Every gesture was identical, every step perfectly timed. When one soldier checked his weapon, they all checked their weapons in exactly the same way. "We need to get out of here," Amy said, but there was nowhere to go. The lockdown had turned our workplace into our prison. Every exit was sealed behind steel barriers, 3 inches thick. Even the emergency tunnels had been locked down. I grabbed emergency weapons from the security locker, 2 pistols, a shotgun, and whatever ammunition we had stored. The weapons felt inadequate against whatever was coming for us, but they were better than nothing. Amy took one of the pistols and checked the magazine with practiced efficiency. She'd been military before joining the emergency services, and her training showed in how she handled the weapon. "Ryan, look at this," she said, pointing to another security monitor. "Watch how they move." I followed her gaze to the screen showing the exterior. The soldiers had begun their breach, but their movements were unnaturally coordinated. When one team cut through a door, every other team made the exact same cutting pattern. When one soldier advanced, they all advanced with identical steps. It was like watching a single mind controlling multiple bodies. We made our way to the facility's lower levels, avoiding the main corridors where the security cameras would track us. The emergency alert center was built like an iceberg. Most of it was underground. Storage rooms, server farms, backup generators, and maintenance tunnels filled 3 subterranean levels. If we were going to avoid capture, we needed to use the facility's own layout against our pursuers. The soldiers had entered the building and were systematically searching each floor. Through the security feeds, I watched them move through our facility with impossible coordination. They cleared rooms with mechanical precision, never wasting movement, never showing hesitation. It was like watching a computer simulation of a perfect military operation. In the server room on sub-level 2, I accessed files I'd never seen before. Hidden behind layers of classified security that shouldn't have existed on our systems, I discovered the emergency alert center's true purpose. The files were marked with security classifications I didn't recognize, clearance levels that went beyond anything I'd been briefed on. We weren't just monitoring threats. We were part of a containment system for what the files called anomalous entities. The documents described previous incidents where government officials had been replaced by visitors from beyond Earth. These visitors didn't conquer through force. They infiltrated, replaced key personnel, and slowly took control from within. The Emergency Alert Center was designed to identify and contain these infiltrations. Our monitoring equipment wasn't just watching for conventional threats. Hidden subroutines in our software were analyzing communication patterns, looking for signs of coordinated behavior among government officials. When the system detected potential infiltration, it was supposed to trigger containment protocols. But something had gone wrong. The containment protocols had been reversed. Amy found personnel files showing that Mike Torres had been flagged as potentially compromised 2 weeks ago. The files contained detailed behavioral analysis, noting changes in his speech patterns, decision-making processes, and social interactions. Security footage from 3 days earlier showed Mike meeting with individuals who looked exactly like high-ranking government officials I recognized from news broadcasts. But something was wrong with the footage. The officials moved in perfect synchronization, never blinking at the same time, speaking with identical speech patterns. When one gestured, they all gestured. When one sat down, they all sat down at precisely the same moment. It was like watching puppets controlled by the same strings. "Ryan, these aren't soldiers hunting us," Amy whispered, studying the security feeds, showing our pursuers. "Look at how they move. Look at their coordination." She was right. The figures in hazmat suits moved with mechanical precision, turning corners at identical angles, checking rooms with the same methodical pattern. When one raised their weapon to sweep an area, they all raised their weapons in exactly the same way. When one stepped forward, they all stepped forward with identical stride, length and timing. An explosion rocked the facility as the entities broke through the first security barrier. The blast was far more powerful than it should have been, shaking the entire underground structure. Emergency lights flickered, and the smell of smoke and something else, something chemical and wrong, filled the air. We could hear them, moving through the upper levels, their footsteps echoing in perfect unison. The sound was terrifying. Dozens of feet hitting the floor at exactly the same time, creating a rhythmic pounding that seemed to shake the walls. It wasn't human. Humans couldn't coordinate their movements that precisely, especially not while conducting a military operation in an unfamiliar building. Amy and I fought our way through the corridors, using the facility's own defense systems against our pursuers. Motion sensors triggered security barriers, temporarily slowing their advance. Emergency foam systems created obstacles they had to navigate around. Gas suppression systems filled sections of the facility with harmless but obscuring vapor. But they kept coming, relentless and coordinated. They adapted to each obstacle with identical efficiency, finding solutions at exactly the same time and implementing them with perfect synchronization. It was like fighting a single enemy with dozens of bodies. The first real firefight happened in the storage bay on sub-level 1. 6 of the entities cornered us between shipping containers filled with emergency supplies. Amy took a position behind a concrete pillar while I used an overturned table for cover. The entities moved with terrifying coordination, advancing in perfect formation while laying down suppressing fire. Their weapons fired some kind of energy projectile that left scorch marks on the concrete walls. The shots made a sound like electricity arcing through metal, followed by a sharp crack as they impacted. When one of their rounds hit a water pipe, the metal didn't just rupture. It disintegrated, leaving a perfectly round hole, as if the material had been vaporized. Amy's military training showed as she laid down covering fire, forcing the entities to take cover behind their own obstacles. But even their defensive movements were coordinated. When one ducked behind cover, they all ducked at exactly the same time. When one popped up to return fire, they all emerged simultaneously. "Ryan, they're not thinking independently," Amy shouted over the sound of gunfire. "They're sharing information instantly. When one of them sees our position, they all know where we are." She was right. Fighting them was like fighting a single opponent with multiple bodies and perfect tactical awareness. But that coordination also created opportunities. When we forced one to retreat, they all retreated. When we disrupted one's firing pattern, they all hesitated. I managed to trigger the storage bay's fire suppression system, flooding the area with chemical foam that obscured visibility. In the chaos, we escaped through a maintenance tunnel that led deeper into the facility. Behind us, I could hear the entities moving through the foam with mechanical precision, their coordination unaffected by the loss of visual contact. During our escape through the ventilation system, Amy got separated from me. We'd been moving through the ductwork when an explosion below us caused part of the structure to collapse. I saw her fall through a damaged section, landing hard in a corridor 2 levels down. "Amy!" I called through the twisted metal, but there was no immediate response. I heard her calling my name from somewhere in the facility's lower levels, her voice echoing through the ventilation system. Then the sound changed, became muffled, like she was being restrained. Her voice cut off abruptly, leaving only the mechanical footsteps of our pursuers and the hum of the facility's life support systems. The silence that followed was worse than her screams would have been. I spent the next 20 minutes fighting my way through the facility, using maintenance tunnels and service corridors to avoid the entity's systematic sweep. The building's layout worked in my favor. 3 years of working here had taught me every shortcut and hidden passage, but the entities were learning too, adapting their search patterns based on where I'd been spotted. I found Amy in the medical bay, sitting calmly in a chair like nothing had happened. But Amy was different. Her posture was too straight, too perfect. Her hands were folded in her lap with precision that seemed unnatural. When she looked at me, her eyes seemed to focus on a point just behind my head, rather than making direct eye contact. "Ryan, you need to stop fighting," she said, without any emotion in her voice. Her speech pattern had changed completely. The casual tone, the slight accent from her childhood in Texas, the way she emphasized certain words, all of it was gone. She spoke like she was reading from a teleprompter. "Amy, what did they do to you?" I asked, keeping my weapon trained on her. Every instinct I had was screaming that the person in front of me wasn't really my partner. "The integration process is painless," she continued, ignoring my question. "You will retain all your memories and personality. You will simply have a better understanding of your purpose. The resistance you feel is natural but counterproductive." Integration. The word sent chills down my spine. The classified files had mentioned integration as the process by which the entities converted humans to serve their agenda. It wasn't death or replacement, it was something worse. The person remained, but became something else, a puppet wearing a familiar face. "Amy, this isn't you talking," I said, trying to reach whatever might be left of my partner. "Fight it. Remember who you are." "I am Amy Davis," she replied with mechanical precision. "I remember my childhood in Houston, my military service, my decision to join the emergency services. I remember every conversation we have had, every joke you have told, every moment we have shared. But I also understand now that human resistance is futile and counterproductive to galactic harmony." Galactic harmony. The phrase was so alien, so unlike anything Amy would ever say, that it confirmed my worst fears. Whatever integration meant, it had turned my partner into something else while preserving her memories and appearance. The thing that looked like Amy moved faster than any human could. One moment she was sitting calmly in the chair, the next she was lunging at me with inhuman speed and strength. I barely had time to defend myself. Her movements were too precise, too calculated, like she'd been programmed for combat. I was forced to fight someone who looked like my partner but moved like a machine. Her attacks were perfectly executed but somehow predictable, like she was following a predetermined program. Every strike was technically perfect but lacked the improvisation and creativity that made human fighters dangerous. Amy had always been a skilled fighter, but her style had been adaptable, creative, using her environment and improvising when plans fell apart. This thing fought with mechanical precision, following optimal techniques without deviation. It was more efficient than human combat, but also more predictable. I managed to stay ahead of her by fighting unpredictably, using desperate improvisation against her calculated precision. When she expected me to retreat, I advanced. When she anticipated a defensive move, I attacked. Human illogic became my greatest weapon against her enhanced capabilities. The fight ended when I managed to trigger a security door that slammed shut between us. Through the reinforced glass, I watched as the thing that looked like Amy stood perfectly still, showing no frustration or emotion at being trapped. It simply stood there like a machine waiting for new instructions. In the end, I had to accept that my partner of 18 months was gone. Her body remained enhanced and controlled by whatever process had integrated her. If they could do that to her, they could do it to anyone. Government officials, military personnel, law enforcement, emergency responders, anyone in a position of authority could be compromised. The implications were staggering. How long had this been going on? How many people in positions of power had already been integrated? Was this a recent development, or had they been infiltrating our institutions for years? I fought my way to the main transmission center, the heart of our facility's communication network. The path was blocked by more integrated humans, facility security guards I recognized, their faces familiar but their movements identical to the soldiers outside. They spoke in the same measured cadence as the converted Amy, trying to convince me to surrender peacefully. Each fight was harder than the last. The integrated humans were stronger and faster than they should have been, their bodies enhanced by whatever process had converted them. But they were also predictable, following the same tactical patterns. I learned to exploit their mechanical thinking, using chaos and unpredictability to stay ahead of their programmed responses. What I found in the transmission center changed everything I thought I knew about our purpose. The Emergency Alert Center wasn't just capable of overriding local broadcasts. It could hijack every communication system on Earth simultaneously. Television, radio, internet, cellular networks, emergency services, military communications, satellite uplinks, everything. One signal from this room could reach every connected device on the planet. The equipment was far more sophisticated than I'd realized. Hidden transmitters I'd never seen before lined the walls, their purpose now becoming clear. The facility wasn't just for emergency broadcasts. It was designed for global psychological operations capable of influencing entire populations through carefully crafted messages. The entities had been planning to use our system to broadcast a conversion signal that would transform the entire human population. According to the mission parameters I found in the compromised files, the process would begin at exactly 3 a.m. Eastern Time. The signal would be embedded in normal television and radio programming, undetectable to human ears, but capable of triggering the integration process in anyone who heard it. The files contained technical details about the conversion process that made my blood run cold. The signal didn't just affect behavior, it physically altered brain chemistry, creating new neural pathways while preserving existing memories. The result was a human mind with all its original personality and knowledge, but with new priorities and loyalties hardwired into its neural structure. It was 2:45 a.m. I had 15 minutes to prevent the extinction of humanity as we knew it. The facility shook as more explosions echoed through the corridors. The entities were destroying everything behind them, eliminating evidence of their presence. Smoke and chemical fumes filled the air, making it hard to breathe. I could hear them approaching the transmission center, their synchronized footsteps growing louder and more insistent. I tried to destroy the transmission equipment, but the systems were hardened against sabotage. The entities had planned for someone trying to stop them from the inside. Every critical component was protected by reinforced barriers I couldn't breach with conventional weapons. Blast shields, redundant systems, automatic repair protocols. They'd thought of everything. The control panels were sealed behind armored glass that my weapons couldn't penetrate. Backup systems automatically activated when I damaged primary circuits. Firewalls blocked my attempts to access the core programming. Every safeguard was designed to prevent exactly what I was trying to do, but they'd made one mistake. They'd assumed anyone who discovered their plan would try to destroy the system instead of using it. I could hijack their signal. At 2:58 a.m., the conversion transmission began broadcasting on every frequency. I could feel it in the air, a low vibration that seemed to resonate in my bones. The sensation was nauseating, like being too close to high-powered electrical equipment. On the monitors, I watched as the signal reached populated areas across the time zones. The effects were immediate and terrifying. People stopped what they were doing and stared at screens. Their eyes became unfocused, their movements slowing as the signal took effect. In Times Square, crowds of people stood motionless, looking up at the electronic billboards with blank expressions. In Los Angeles, drivers pulled over and sat in their cars, staring at their phones. The integration was beginning on a global scale. I worked frantically to override the system, using every emergency protocol I'd been trained on. The override wasn't perfect. I could only interrupt their transmission for short periods before their systems adapted and pushed back, but it was enough to get a message out. My voice went out over every communication device on Earth, cutting through their conversion signal like a knife through silence. This is Ryan Clark at Emergency Alert Station 7. If you're hearing this, they're already among us. The people you trust, the officials you see on television, some of them aren't human anymore. They look like us, but they move wrong. They talk wrong. They speak too formally. They coordinate their actions perfectly. They never make the small mistakes that real humans make. The entities broke into the transmission room as I continued broadcasting. There were dozens of them now. Soldiers, facility personnel, people I recognized from the local area. They all looked human, but their faces were too symmetrical, too perfect. No scars, no blemishes, no asymmetries that marked a lifetime of human experience. They moved toward me with identical steps, reaching out with identical gestures, their movements perfectly synchronized. Get inside your homes and lock your doors. Disconnect from the internet, turn off your televisions, put away your phones. The conversion signal is being broadcast through every connected device. Don't trust anyone who tries to convince you everything is normal. They've infiltrated the government, the military, the media. When they tell you to come outside, when they say they're here to help, don't listen. I triggered the facility's self-destruct sequence as the entities surrounded me. The countdown began, nuclear failsafes disengaging as the facility prepared to destroy itself. Red lights flashed throughout the room as automated systems announced the impending detonation. I had less than 60 seconds to get the truth out to as many people as possible before the transmission ended forever. The official response will be compromised because they control the officials. They don't conquer through force. They replace us one by one, starting with people in positions of authority. Look for the signs, identical speech patterns, too perfect coordination, responses that sound scripted. They move like they're following programming instead of thinking for themselves. The entities grabbed me, but I kept broadcasting. Their touch felt cold, wrong, like being grabbed by something pretending to be alive. Their skin had the texture of plastic, smooth and artificial. Up close I could see that their eyes didn't move naturally. They tracked objects with mechanical precision instead of the random movements of living eyes. They're spreading through our institutions like a virus, and most people won't realize what's happening until it's too late. The integration process maintains your memories and personality while adding their control. The people you know might still look and sound like themselves, but they'll be working for a different agenda. The countdown reached 30 seconds. Emergency klaxons blared throughout the facility as the self-destruct sequence entered its final phase. The entities seemed unconcerned about the impending explosion, focused entirely on stopping my transmission. They were willing to die to prevent humanity from learning the truth. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong about the people around you, when their behavior seems too perfect or too coordinated, pay attention to that feeling. Stay away from large crowds where the integrated might identify you as unconverted. Keep your distance from authority figures who speak like they're reading from scripts. 20 seconds. The facility's nuclear reactor began its emergency shutdown sequence, but not before releasing enough energy to vaporize everything within a mile radius. The explosion would destroy all evidence of what had happened here, but it would also eliminate the entity's primary conversion facility. And whatever you do, don't let them convince you that everything is normal. Don't let them talk you into compliance. The people who sound the most reasonable, who seem the most trustworthy, might be the most dangerous of all. This is Ryan Clark, signing off. Stay hidden, stay human, and remember, when everyone is telling you the same thing, when every official sounds exactly alike, that's when you know they've won. 10 seconds. The entities released me and began moving toward the exits with the same synchronized precision they'd shown throughout the night. They knew they couldn't escape the blast, but they were still following their programming, still trying to complete their mission even in the face of certain destruction. 5 seconds. I looked at the monitors one last time, watching as my transmission cut through their conversion signal across the globe. People were shaking their heads, blinking, looking around in confusion as they broke free from the mental paralysis. Not everyone, the signal had already affected millions, but enough to give humanity a fighting chance. The facility exploded in a fireball that could be seen for miles across the Nevada desert. The blast was powerful enough to register on seismographs in California and Utah. My warning broadcast across every communication device on Earth for exactly 37 seconds before cutting to static. Then, across the nation, calm voices began speaking over radio and television. The voices were reassuring, professional, exactly the kind of authoritative tone people expected from government officials during a crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, please disregard the previous emergency broadcast. There is no current threat to public safety. The transmission was the result of a technical malfunction at a government facility in Nevada. The facility has been secured, and the malfunction has been corrected. Please return to your normal activities and ignore any misinformation you may have heard. The messages were broadcast simultaneously across hundreds of stations, delivered by different announcers who all spoke with the same measured cadence. Local officials, federal representatives, military spokespersons, emergency management directors, they all delivered virtually identical statements with only minor variations in wording. But if you were listening carefully, if you were paying attention to the details I'd warned you about, you would have noticed something wrong with those reassuring voices. They never used contractions like don't or can't. They always said do not and cannot. They never stumbled over words, never showed any emotion or personality, never deviated from their prepared scripts. And if you listened to enough of them, you'd realize they all had the same underlying speech pattern, the same rhythm and intonation. Different voices delivering the same message with identical precision. The integration had already begun. The people in charge, the ones we trusted to protect us, had been replaced by something else. My warning had reached millions of people, but how many believed it? How many dismissed it as the ranting of a disturbed government employee? Within an hour of the explosion, news reports began characterizing the incident as a terrorist attack on a government communications facility. The perpetrator was described as a disgruntled employee who had broadcast false emergency messages before destroying the building in a suicide bombing. My personnel file was leaked to the media, emphasizing any negative performance reviews or psychological evaluations from my background check. The narrative was carefully crafted to discredit everything I'd said. Expert psychologists appeared on news programs to explain how isolation and stress could cause paranoid delusions. Government officials provided detailed explanations of how the facility's security had been compromised by an insider threat. Military analysts discussed the dangers of lone wolf attacks on critical infrastructure. Every explanation was reasonable, logical, and completely wrong. If you're hearing this recording, if someone saved my transmission and shared it with you, then there's still hope. You know the truth now. You know what to look for. The entities may control our institutions, but they haven't converted everyone yet. The integration process isn't perfect. It requires direct exposure to their conversion signal, and it works better on some people than others. Children seem to be more resistant, possibly because their brains are still developing. People with certain mental health conditions also show increased resistance, though the entities have learned to target them specifically to eliminate potential opposition. The integrated humans retain their memories and basic personality traits, but they lose their individuality. They become part of a collective consciousness, sharing information and coordinating their actions within human precision. They can still perform their jobs, maintain relationships, and blend into society, but they're working towards a different goal, than human survival. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong about the people around you, when their behavior seems too perfect or too coordinated, pay attention to that feeling. The integrated humans are almost perfect mimics, but they can't replicate the random imperfections that make us human. Look for people who never make small talk, who always have perfect posture, who respond to questions too quickly without thinking. Watch for groups of people who move in subtle synchronization, who make decisions without discussion, who seem to know things they shouldn't know. Pay attention to speech patterns. The integrated humans tend to speak more formally than natural conversation requires. They avoid contractions, use complete sentences, even in casual conversation, and rarely show emotional inflection in their voices. They answer questions with textbook precision instead of the messy, incomplete responses that characterize human communication. Watch their eyes. Integrated humans track movement with mechanical precision instead of the random scanning patterns of natural human vision. They maintain eye contact for too long during conversations, and their pupils don't dilate normally in response to emotional stimuli. Notice their reactions to unexpected events. Humans show genuine surprise, confusion, or frustration when things don't go according to plan. Integrated humans adapt too quickly, showing minimal emotional response to disruptions. They're always ready with alternative solutions, as if they've already calculated multiple contingencies. Stay away from large crowds where the integrated might identify you as unconverted. Avoid government buildings, military installations, and any facility with high security. The entities have prioritized infiltrating positions of authority, so the people most likely to be integrated are those with power over others. Keep your distance from authority figures who speak like they're reading from scripts. Police officers, government officials, military personnel, emergency responders, anyone whose job gives them access to weapons, communication systems, or the ability to control civilian populations. Not all of them have been integrated, but enough have been compromised to make contact dangerous. And whatever you do, don't let them convince you that everything is normal. They'll use every psychological technique available to make you doubt what you've seen and heard. They'll provide rational explanations for irrational events. They'll appeal to your desire for normalcy and safety. They'll make resistance seem foolish and compliance seem reasonable. The people who sound the most trustworthy, who seem the most concerned about your well-being, might be the most dangerous of all. The integrated humans are perfect manipulators because they understand human psychology without being limited by human emotions. But remember, they're not invincible. The explosion that destroyed the Nevada facility proved they can be stopped. Their coordination is both their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. When you disrupt their plans, when you act unpredictably, when you refuse to follow their scripts, you force them to adapt. An adaptation takes time, creates opportunities, reveals their true nature. Find other unintegrated humans. Build networks of people who can verify each other's humanity. Develop codes and signals that only real humans would understand. Create safe spaces where you can speak freely without fear of surveillance or infiltration. Test people you suspect might be integrated. Ask them about specific memories that only the real person would know. Look for emotional responses to personal topics. Present them with moral dilemmas that require genuine human judgment rather than programmed responses. Document everything. Record conversations, save evidence, maintain written records of unusual behavior. The integrated humans are working to control information, to shape the narrative of what's happening. Truth becomes a weapon when lies are the enemy's primary tool. Stay off the grid as much as possible. Avoid electronic communications that can be monitored or compromised. Use cash instead of credit cards. physical mail instead of email, face-to-face meetings instead of phone calls. The entities are using our own technology against us, so the more connected you are, the more vulnerable you become. Prepare for the long term. This isn't a crisis that will resolve quickly. The entities have been planning this infiltration for years, possibly decades. They've embedded themselves so deeply in our institutions that removing them will require a complete restructuring of society. Stock up on supplies that don't require electronic systems. Food, water, medicine, tools, weapons, anything you might need if the integrated humans cut off access to normal supply chains. Learn skills that don't depend on technology. Know how to grow food, purify water, provide basic medical care, and defend yourself without relying on systems they might control. Build alternative communication networks. Ham radio operators, shortwave enthusiasts, and people with off-grid communication capabilities become crucial when traditional channels are compromised. Establish contact with rural communities that might be less affected by the integration process, and never give up hope. Humanity has survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and natural disasters. We've faced extinction before and found ways to continue. This threat is different, more insidious, but we have advantages the entities don't expect. We're unpredictable. We're illogical. We make decisions based on emotion instead of calculation. We sacrifice for people we love, fight for principles we believe in, and refuse to surrender even when victory seems impossible. These traits make us vulnerable to manipulation, but they also make us impossible to fully control. The integrated humans can mimic our behavior, but they can't replicate our spirit. They can copy our words, but they can't understand our dreams. They can control our institutions, but they can't conquer our hearts. Remember what makes us human. Our capacity for love that defies logic. Our ability to hope when everything seems hopeless. Our willingness to sacrifice for strangers, to fight for abstract principles like freedom and dignity. These aren't weaknesses to be exploited. They're strengths that can't be programmed or replicated. The entities understand efficiency, optimization, and logical outcomes. They don't understand why a parent would risk everything to save a child, why soldiers would die for their country, or why ordinary people would resist even when resistance seems futile. That incomprehension is their fatal flaw. Use that against them. Be irrational when they expect logic. Show mercy when they anticipate ruthlessness. Act on emotion when they calculating probability. The very things that make us imperfect as a species make us impossible to predict or control completely. Form communities of resistance, not the kind that fight with guns and bombs, though that may become necessary, but communities that preserve human culture, human values, human ways of thinking. Teach children about the world before integration. Keep alive the stories, the art, the music, the literature that defines who we are as a species. The entities can replace our leaders, but they can't replace our collective memory. They can control our governments, but they can't control our dreams. They can integrate our bodies, but they can't integrate our souls, not unless we let them. Watch for the signs of their expansion. They'll move systematically through positions of power, starting with those who have the most influence over others. Government officials, military commanders, police chiefs, corporate executives, media personalities, religious leaders, anyone who can shape public opinion or control resources. The integration process requires time and proximity. They can't convert someone instantly from a distance. They need physical access to implement the neural modifications that create the integration. This means the process has limits, vulnerabilities that can be exploited. Isolated communities will be safer than urban centres. Rural areas where people know each other personally will be harder to infiltrate than anonymous cities. Places with limited electronic infrastructure will be more resistant to their technological advantages, but don't make the mistake of thinking you can hide forever. Eventually they'll come for everyone. The integration process is designed to be universal. They want every human being on the planet to become part of their collective. Isolation is a temporary defense, not a permanent solution. When the time comes to fight back, target their coordination. Their greatest strength is also their greatest weakness. Disrupt their communication networks, create chaos that forces them to adapt independently. The more you can break their synchronization, the more human-like their responses become, and the more vulnerable they are to conventional resistance. Look for others like yourself. There are more unintegrated humans out there than you might think. My warning reached millions of people in those 37 seconds. Not all of them dismissed it as the ranting of a madman. Some believed, some prepared, some are waiting for the right moment to act. Find them, connect with them. Build networks of people who remember what humanity was like before the integration began. These networks will become the foundation of whatever civilization emerges after this crisis ends. And it will end. No matter how perfect their plan seems, no matter how total their control becomes, human nature will find a way to resist. We always have. Throughout history, no tyranny has been permanent. No oppression has been absolute. This won't be either. The entities made a fundamental mistake when they chose to preserve human memory and personality during the integration process. They thought they could control the human mind while keeping it recognizably human. But memory includes not just facts but emotions, experiences, the very essence of what made each person unique. Somewhere inside every integrated human, the original person still exists, buried under layers of programming, suppressed by artificial neural pathways, but still there. The entities couldn't erase those core memories without destroying the very thing they were trying to preserve and control. That means the integration process isn't permanent. Those neural modifications can be disrupted, reversed, overcome by the original personality if given the right stimulus. The person your loved ones used to be isn't gone. They're trapped, waiting for rescue. Research is already beginning in hidden laboratories run by unintegrated scientists. People who escape the conversion process are working to understand how it functions, looking for ways to reverse the effects. Early results suggest the integration creates specific brainwave patterns that can be detected and potentially disrupted. Electromagnetic pulse weapons might temporarily disable the artificial neural networks. Certain frequencies of sound or light might disrupt the synchronization signals. Chemical compounds that affect neurotransmitter function could interfere with the integration programming. None of these solutions are perfected yet, but they represent hope. The entities may be technologically advanced, but they're not gods. They're vulnerable to the same scientific principles that govern everything else in the universe. More importantly, they're vulnerable to human ingenuity. They understand efficiency and optimization, but they don't understand creativity, intuition, the leaps of logic that characterize human innovation. Every breakthrough in our understanding of their technology brings us closer to freedom. The war for humanity's future won't be won in a single battle. It will be a long struggle, fought on multiple fronts: technological, psychological, cultural, and spiritual. Victory will require not just defeating the entities, but rebuilding civilization in a way that prevents future infiltration. We'll need new institutions that can't be compromised by individual infiltrators, decentralized networks instead of hierarchical command structures, multiple redundant systems instead of single points of failure, transparency instead of secrecy, local autonomy instead of centralized control. The world that emerges from this crisis will be different from the one we lost. It will have to be, or will remain vulnerable to similar threats in the future. But different doesn't mean worse. In many ways, it might be better, more democratic, more resilient, more human. Until that day comes, your job is simple: survive, resist, and remember. Keep alive the memory of what we were before the integration began. Preserve the knowledge, skills, and values that define human civilization. Connect with others who share your commitment to staying human. And never stop fighting for the truth. The entities control the official narrative now. They control the news media, the government spokespersons, the academic institutions that shape public opinion. They'll work tirelessly to convince everyone that what happened that night never occurred, that the integration is natural, human evolution, that resistance is futile and harmful. Don't let them rewrite history. Don't let them convince you that your memories are false or that your perceptions are unreliable. You know what you experienced. You know what you saw. You know what you heard in my transmission that night. Hold on to that truth. Share it with others when it's safe to do so. Document it in ways they can't erase or alter. Pass it down to future generations who will need to understand how this all began if they are going to prevent it from happening again. This is Ryan Clark, and if you're still human, if you're still thinking for yourself, then you are part of the resistance, whether you realize it or not. Every day, you maintain your independence. Every moment you refuse to be integrated. Every act of defiance against their control. You're fighting for the future of our species. The warning system was supposed to protect us from threats. I never imagined we would become the threat they were protecting against. But as long as one human remains free, as long as one person remembers what we used to be, there's still hope for what we might become again. The entities believe they've won because they control our institutions and have integrated millions of our people. They think they understand us because they've studied our psychology and behavior patterns. They assume we'll eventually surrender because resistance seems hopeless and compliance seems reasonable. They're wrong. They don't understand the most fundamental truth about humanity. We're at our best when things are at their worst. When everything seems lost, when victory appears impossible, when the odds are stacked against us. That's when we find reserves of strength and courage we never knew we had. That's when ordinary people become heroes, when cowards find bravery, when the weak discover they're stronger than they ever imagined, when hope emerges from despair and light shines in the darkest places. The entities conquered our governments, but they haven't conquered our spirits. They integrated our leaders, but they haven't integrated our dreams. They control our technology, but they can't control our humanity. And in the end, that humanity will be enough. Stay human, stay free, stay alive, and remember, the night is darkest just before the dawn. This is Ryan Clark, signing off for the last time. Get inside now, lock your doors, trust your instincts, and never stop believing that freedom is worth fighting for. The future of humanity depends on it.